I'm Rachel Horgan. Join me each episode as I sit down with a guest co-host covering the latest business stories in the Seattle area. We'll read the news so you don't have to. This is The Weekly. Hey everybody, welcome back. Happy New Year. I am doing dry January, and I told my friend this. Are you doing it too? No? Okay. I told my friend this, and she's sober, and she's like, Rachel, can you stop appropriating my culture? And I thought that was so funny. Joke credit to my friend Allie Weinhold. She does stand up in LA, and she's always throwing me for a laugh. I don't think the socializing really is the hard part, because I like the NA beers. It's the sitting at home alone watching TV and drinking wine to relax. So instead of that, I've been just filling my time with productivity, which I don't think they recommend, but I'm going through every clothing item in my room and every drawer. And right now I'm on my sock drawer. So I'm doing great. Who gave me a podcast? I'm talking about my socks. But the other thing I wanted to mention is that I'm making progress on I think I've mentioned it a couple times on the podcast, but I'm doing a 1-year anniversary party, and I'm sorry, listeners, but it's just for anybody that's been a podcast guest, and I wanted to just thank all of them. I send them these articles like 2 days before we record. They read them, they come up with amazing things to say, and they take time out of their day. So it's going to be a really special thing. Alaska Airlines is sponsoring it. Shout out to Alaska Airlines. Thank you for the support on that. It's coming up in March, so I've been sending out some invites, and I'm really excited about it. But don't worry, listeners. I know I want to do something with you all and have kind of a live event, live recording of a podcast. I have a vision for it, but I think it's going to have to be in 2026. So that is my update. I'm sitting here with Alison Beddard, managing principal for the Oregon and Washington office for Cushman Wakefield. Hello.
Hey,
how's it going?
It's great. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thanks for hosting me. We are over here in, I guess, downtown. You still call it downtown, yeah, with a nice little window view. So I appreciate you hosting me.
That's right. We've got the Space Needle peeking through right through
we
the...
do.
And we've got sunshine today.
I love it.
That's right.
I think I first met you... I don't remember the exact event, but I remember I think it was you and your wife, and I don't know if we told you this, but all of us went back to the office and we're like, they're so cool. We're like, they're just the coolest power couple in Seattle. So ever since then, I've been following your journey and seeing you win all these awards. So it's cool to have you on the podcast.
Well, Rachel, thanks for having me. I remember when we met too, and it's nice to know like we were popular with somebody.
Yes.
I moved here 4 years ago, and it feels like a blip.
God, it must have been right when you moved here, I think, because I feel like I've known about you for a couple of years. Yeah,
it's been a great transition.
So speaking of your background a little bit, you've worked at Cushman Wakefield, which I will say is a commercial real estate company, for those not familiar. And you worked for them for close to 20 years. You were the managing principal, which for those not in this industry, managing principal pretty much means like president and CEO, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So you were the managing principal for Utah and then for Washington. And most recently, it's Washington and Oregon. They added that to your portfolio, and that was almost 2 years ago. And on top of that, you serve on the UW Runstad Advisory Board, and you're part of the executive committee for CBA, Commercial Brokers Association. So that is your background. But I do want to talk about, I did my research on you, and I listened to a podcast episode. On your LinkedIn, it says you went from flight attendant to Cushman and Wakefield, but that's not the truth, is it? You got your degree as a dietitian, and correct me if any part of this is wrong, but you got your degree as a dietitian, and you started working in this hospital, and you're like, I'm not liking this. And you kind of wanted to be a motivational speaker for dietitian stuff. But at one point, your friend asked you or said that you should be a flight attendant. And you're like, okay, cool, I'll do that. And then while you're doing that, you're like, you know what? I'm going to start more things. And so you got your real estate license, started doing property management on top of flight attending, right? You're still doing both. Mm-hmm. And somewhere in there, you're running a nightclub. Mm-hmm. And then another friend, then you got your financial planning license, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, and then another friend suggested you do commercial real estate. So the theme I'm seeing in here is not only that you're entrepreneurial and you like to do a bunch of different things, but also that you have really smart friends that tell you what to do.
And I listen.
And you listen. But I bring that up because I think a lot of our listeners are maybe afraid to change careers or want to change careers and don't know where to go. So talk to me a little bit about like how you jumped from these different places and why you ultimately landed at commercial real estate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you've got a great memory, and you did sum it up a little bit there. So, Rachel, I think that Yeah, I hope that this story resonates with folks out there, especially when you're looking for what is my career going to look like? What am I going to do with my life? Because I had a really windy path and I had no idea, that commercial real estate would be my thing. If you really think about, like for me, what I thought about what makes me tick, it's I love working with people, I love being of service, and I like making some kind of impact in my community. And I didn't know what that was going to look like, right? Mm-hmm. So like on paper, maybe commercial real estate. Anyway, I'm really glad that I found it. But getting there, my mom and dad were both in the sciences, and they both suggested to me, or very strongly, go get a degree that you can use, and then go get a job with security and benefits and safety and that type of thing. And neither one of them are real entrepreneurial. It's just not how they were brought up, And so that was kind of how I was raised. And then I get the degree, I get started, and gosh, it's just not what I thought it was going to be. And then I was frustrated because I had moved back home with mom and dad and, all of the things, right? So then being open to Delta Airlines, who I ultimately worked for, and just the idea of being part of a big organization, having this freedom and this independence was really exciting at the time. And I also, I guess, just trusted that, if I was doing what I loved, everything else was going to work out and it would lead me to the next thing. And I read this book in college called Do What You Love and the Money Will Follow. And it had rainbow it was like a rainbow, paperback. I'm probably like the rainbow part, but I never forgot that little book, because I thought, and that's truly what's happened in my career. And so one thing led to the other, and I ended up moving to Salt Lake City, Utah, which I didn't know a soul when I moved there. That takes risk. And what I started realizing about myself is I'm really comfortable taking risk. And the more risks I've taken in my career, the better I've done. Mm-hmm. But I've really had to trust that it's going to work out. And sometimes things work out exactly how you think they are. And I would say most of the time, we have no idea how limitless we can be, in our dreams, if we just allow them to be. Mm. A lot of times we just set up these constructs for ourselves that are already limiting. So totally. My biggest advice early on is trust your instincts, don't overthink it, just try, you know? And that really did lead me down. I mean, when I ultimately chose to get into brokerage, which was all 100% commission-based, total talk about jumping off the end of the diving board, going into no salary, no health benefits, whatever. I had to go do all this myself. It was actually very freeing. I didn't know it was going to be like that, but it ultimately helped me feel like I was out in control of my life because I was the one turning the crank, kind of similar to what you're doing, right? Now everything you're doing is like, okay, I'm building this. And I learned a lot over that. And so it's kind of funny when I went into the leadership role at Cushman Wakefield after 14 years of being a broker, it was all because I wanted to further creating positive change in the industry. And I thought that I could have a more meaningful impact with helping with our people in our organization in this particular type of role than I could as a broker. And that also came with risks and changes because, I'd never done this before. So jumping off the end of the diving board to go into this, and I've learned a lot, I've gotten better. I've managed a lot of change over the years and things like that we'll probably talk about. But
we're going to talk a lot about that. I like taking a position of power, not for power's sake, but because you have ideas and dreams and ways of seeing things that can be done, and you need that position to be able to do it. The other thing I like that you were kind of talking about is I've never taken a job as a stepping stone to anything else. I've never said, I don't really like it, but it'll look good on the resume for my next job. I'm always like, this is what I think I want to do right now and go for it. And it sounds like you kind of have that same mentality, right?
Totally. When I took on the leadership role at Crew Network, I never thought what's in it for me.
And so Crew is they were one of my clients at one point, commercial real estate Women Network. It's a global organization. There's 14,000 members now worldwide. I was a chapter leader, and then I was the global president. Global president. Okay. I wasn't sure if you were chapter or global. Wow. Okay.
But I learned so much about myself, and I never thought what's in it for me. And I think if that's really that's really the message. If you really think about it, like, how can I help people? How can I do more? How can I be of service? it always works out. And
Yeah.
it's amazing where it's kind of
One of our
taken
other
things.
guests, Nicole, one of her advice was if you're feeling stuck, especially as a small business owner, go help somebody.
Yeah.
And I've never heard that advice, and it's just like if you're stuck, just focus. Well, I do like that. When I can't solve my own problems, like maybe I can solve somebody else's problem. But
You got it.
okay, so for this week,
Okay.
I chose commercial real estate articles for you, and I will say it's not my area of expertise, but even just chatting with you a little bit before we recorded, I can tell that you're going to teach me a lot, and there's a lot to talk about. And I think for those listening that maybe think that commercial real estate doesn't apply to you, I think it will. So we'll get into it. All right, the first four. Apple is taking over some Meta office space here in Seattle. The next one is Zoom is coming into Bellevue. We'll talk about a historic Pioneer Square building that was just sold. And lastly, Getty Images acquires Shutterstock. So let's begin. Apple. It's taking over a South Lake Union space. It's the largest lease in Seattle since 2019. And Apple had previously announced that they wanted to expand into Seattle by about 2,000 employees over the next 5 years. And so this isn't, I don't think this is that surprising if they've already announced that that was sort of their intention. I guess the pandemic did happen, so we didn't know for sure. And it appears that it's going to be a big engineering office from what the article says. The other thing in the article that we'll talk a little bit about was that there's this graph that shows that we're up to about 30% vacancy in office space, kind of in between different areas, South Lake Union, downtown, a couple other spots. And just to give context, before the pandemic and around 2019, we were around 5 to 10%, again, depending on the area. So that's the article. Allison, do you think this Apple news is surprising? Do you have any initial reactions before I kind of ask you some other questions?
It's super positive, right? Not getting into the specifics of Apple and their strategy, but just thinking about the momentum that this creates in the market. And to your point, I mean, downtown Seattle is sitting at 32% vacancy right now, which is a high water mark. It's not dissimilar with a couple of the other West Coast cities, San Francisco, Portland, to be named. But what this kind of signals is, especially them announcing their engineering division, we're seeing this across the board with more and more tech engineering groups, in the market, and they are in office. That is the way that they operate. They're not working from home. So I look at this as certainly, we have a lot of vacancy to dig out of. This is a very positive signal for that. And more to come.
Yeah, absolutely. So talk to me about South Lake Union. I know that a lot of tech companies are coming into Bellevue and other parts of Seattle, and you obviously oversee Oregon and things like that. So why do you think some tech companies are choosing South Lake Union, or why do you think they choose certain locations over others? What are they thinking about?
Mm-hmm. Well, employers are always thinking about their labor force, where people live, and where they can recruit talent. Mm-hmm. So South Lake Union, there's a synergy there with other technology companies to of course, for talent. So that will continue to exist. That's Bellevue as well has a big tech base, and Seattle. Mm-hmm. When we look at why employers choose Seattle over Bellevue or this, South Lake Union, I think I think employers are now really looking at their real estate strategies versus 2020, 2021, 2022. There was a big pause put because of the pandemic. Employers really didn't think about, they all tried the experiment of work from home, and largely, and some developed it works great, for what they do and all of that. Then we had short-term renewals. So meaning employers just said, I don't want to adjust my strategy yet because I don't know how it's going to be. So largely, though, what we're excited about and where we see that I think we've hit the bottom or the top, however you want to look at that crest, is we've worked ourselves through all of that short-term stuff. Now employers are looking at, I want to be in good quality space so I can attract labor force that want to be together, and I have to have a space that's conducive for it. I have a recent example, actually, a client that we represent who they're in about 50,000 square feet in Seattle. Their initial approach was, I think we want to go look at Bellevue because their national data strategy team, whatever, had put together this research for them showing that Seattle statistically, from a crime perspective, maybe wasn't ideal. Yep. So they thought, okay, we better go look at Bellevue. Then they did all their employee interviews, they did their leadership stakeholder interviews, and what they decided was, there would be too much of it. Their leadership folks lived in Bellevue, they would be probably more inclined to go to the Bellevue office. Most of their rank and file employees all lived in Seattle, and they were really concerned about culture and bifurcating that culture by having either two offices or suggesting that they were going to all move to Bellevue. So they X'd Bellevue from the plan, and they've decided to just focus on Seattle, and they'll be looking at 50,000 square feet for a new office for their operations here. And what was really great was the thought that they put into this and the intentionality to make a really good decision that's going to help them drive, the employee engagement.
Yeah. So, absolutely. I feel like that you don't want that separation of class of like, great, we all have to commute over to Bellevue for these rich people that are running in the office. Like, I definitely think it could create some negative energy there. And so, I'm glad that they did that. So what kind of effect do you think Apple coming into this space is going to have on other office space? Do you think this is going to be a domino effect and we're going to have a lot more people coming into South Lake Union, or just a lot more people following Apple's lead?
I don't know that that's the driver.
Okay.
Well, I think it's pretty specific, not to speak on their strategy, but I just think that that's probably a specific decision. There's a lot of vacancy to work through. I think it signals there's momentum, there's investment from Fortune 500.
Totally.
This is great. The other thing to note is Seattle. I mean, GDP was noted number 1 in the United States, so we've still grown our GDP base. In the last year, we've continued to lean into our tech growth over the last couple of years, when most cities have seen a decline in that sector. So there's a lot of positivity in Seattle in general that I think sometimes gets kind of glossed over in the news, with some of the other.
Yeah, I'm going to take your positivity and add some negativity here because I'm just kidding. But I did want to talk about the vacancies. So that chart that I talked about is, like you said, it's kind of up to that 32%. Do you think this is the peak? Is that what you're hearing in your industry, that's only, I don't know, it depends on how you want to say it. Like, it's only up from here, but also it's only down from here in terms of down in vacancies. But yeah, do you think we're at the worst of it?
Yeah. I definitely think we're at the peak, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, could it get a little worse? I guess none of us have a crystal ball, but we have largely worked through the majority of that vacancy, and we're seeing the pipelines are much more full going into 2025. So I think that crest is probably near or we're there.
Yeah.
That being said, rental rates really haven't come down all that much. And that's probably the biggest eye-opener for employers is they're kind of expecting to get this big discount.
Yeah, like if you want me to bring my office in here, like give me a deal.
So but the thing is the quality office space is leasing. So there will be continued pressure on some of the nicest offices in town and the ones that really deliver the amenities packages. So even if you have you may not be in a trophy Class A office building, but if you're in a property that has the right vibe, meaning you've got amenities, you've got connectivity, it's somewhere place that it's a hub kind of activity for employees to work, live, play, whatever, you're going to do a lot better. That's that kind of flight to quality. So the advice we give to owners is invest now. You want to be on the edge of that. You want to be part of that group if you can be. But they are leasing. I mean, deals are getting done. So it's just that there's a lot to work through. And I think one thing to note that we talk about is way before the pandemic, there was a glut of Class C office space.
Class C for
Class
the
C,
owners.
so would be older properties, sometimes kind of 2-level, 3-level story, suburban product, maybe some historic buildings, some of that type of product that maybe hadn't been updated. And those types of properties, if they weren't updated, they were kind of reaching obsolescence before the pandemic. And the pandemic kind of accelerated things. So it's more of what were we going to do with those properties anyway?
Right.
What were, and have they reached their useful life? So those are the big decisions, but I think it kind of, that 32% also incorporates those properties. And I think we all have to be a little realistic that some of those properties are not coming back.
Yeah.
And so if you took those out of the inventory, what would the actual rentable, usable office space be? It'd probably be closer to 20%.
Yeah,
so it's something that we'll be digging more into as we see more data and we see more activity happen.
Yeah. Well, cool. We're going to move on to the next one, which is Zoom. Yes, the platform that everybody logs in to do their meetings. That Zoom is coming to Bellevue. It's going to go into the Symetra building, which I worked at for a bit. It joins more than 100 other tech companies that have been having their engineering outpost in Seattle or Bellevue. Zoom has launched a new workplace AI companion, and it describes itself. I couldn't tell from the article if it was talking about Zoom describes itself as a company or it's describing this new AI thing as, quote, AI first work platform for human connection, which I don't know. Well, I don't know if I like that. But anyway, the story is that Zoom's coming to Bellevue. And yeah, there's not a lot really going on in that article besides that. So, Alison, are you seeing a lot of other San Francisco tech companies looking for Pacific Northwest space? They're coming to hang out up here.
Yeah. I mean, we are usually it's either San Francisco or Seattle. So a lot of these tech companies will come up to Seattle. We've got the tech talent. Bellevue's a great opportunity for them. And Bellevue is slightly more expensive than Seattle. Mm-hmm. So that's usually the.
But isn't it? I thought there was like less taxes in Bellevue for some of the companies.
Yeah, there's less taxes, maybe a little bit more friendly and permitting and things like that. So, but the atmosphere is different, right? Yeah. So just kind of depends on where your labor force is and where you think you can recruit your employees from. Yeah. And that's really where we see the drivers. So I had one tenant who put their firm in Bellevue. They had historically been in Seattle, and it didn't go well. So they ended up having to open up their Seattle office again and have two. Mm. They couldn't get the folks to come over. So I think employers have to pay attention to their culture base and what's going to work. But Bellevue is I think finally there's going to be some opportunities for tenants to be able to get into Bellevue that, prior to the last couple of years was constrained.
Right.
So.
And you oversee Oregon as well. So how does kind of the action and what's happening in Washington, I guess, big picture, how does that compare? How do the two states kind of compare?
So what I would say is Seattle, Washington, I mean, it's further ahead than Oregon or Portland, I should say.
We're better than Oregon is what I heard. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. She didn't say that. I did.
Portland's got a little more to work through, and I think what we've seen politically in Seattle, from the leadership standpoint here, seeing the city kind of cleaned up, seeing movement towards a positive kind of, let's move this thing along. You got the waterfront project opening up. You've got, light rail system that opened up. You've got the I-90 that'll be opening, in the next year or so. All of those things are just really positive, right? You've got an engaged city council. You've got an engaged mayor. I mean, it's pretty good, like wherever you go with all that, we've seen productivity.
Yeah, we're making progress. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's positive. You want to see some momentum there, right? You want to see that kind of investment. Portland's just they're going to come through.
Yeah.
Portland, what I've come to understand, and I'm still learning a lot because I'm newer to that market, but there's a fierce pride, with people who live in Portland and from Portland, and so they're going to figure it out. Mm-hmm. It's just, but they are lagging the Seattle market probably by a year or two.
Yeah. I'm from Eugene, so go Ducks.
Hey!
I love it. Anything else you want to say on this one before we move on?
Oh, no, all good.
Okay. All right, we're going to talk about the historic Pioneer Square building that sold. So it's called the Coleman Building. I know it as the building where Owl and Thistle is, which is that dive bar down by the waterfront. And it sold through receivership. So if you guys remember from previous episodes, how that is a little bit different from bankruptcy is that it's sort of forced because it's like, hey, we got to come over and take this over. So Kidder Matthews came in and facilitated a sale to a Jay Bueller, which to me, it seems like it's an individual that bought it. And the new owner, he's going to reactivate the street level retail and lease out some office spaces. I guess there was almost going to be some housing there, but he ultimately decided to do retail and office space. This building, just some background, it came up after the Great Fire of 1889, which leveled most of Seattle, and then it got built up. And so because of that, it's a designated landmark on the National Register of Historic Places. The current lease ends in March, and something that I thought was interesting in the article is that Alan Thistle, the owner, was like, I still haven't heard from them. Like, I don't know if I'm out of this place in March or not, which I didn't love that because he's like, I want my staff to know. I want to do some renovations, and I can't make any decisions until I know. So hopefully by the time this airs, he does. Yeah. Anything else from the article that stood out to you?
Yeah, I just did the underground tour this past
weekend.
You did?
Oh, my God. I did it for the first time a year ago, and it's so interesting. Our city's built on the, what's her face? Madame Lou.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, a big shout out to Sarah, who was our tour guide. She was amazing. I was so impressed. I learned so much on that tour, and it was fun to do. But here's what I would say about it's great to see. We're going to see more of these. There were several buildings last year sold out of receivership. Dexter Horton Building was another one that King County bought, picked up. Our firm's now going to be doing the leasing for it. But seeing this investment in Pioneer Square is great. I'm very bullish on Pioneer Square. I think like long term, if retail, will thrive there. You've got the water, the ferry,
new ferry,
ferry system, and then the new waterfront project all kind of terminating right there, right? So a lot of connectivity. But yeah, I was a little surprised too to see that they're going to keep it office. So I don't know if ultimately maybe they're doing some due diligence, maybe they're figuring it out. Maybe the building just can't be retrofitted.
Yeah.
That's probably the most popular topic, is everybody wants to figure out how to convert their office to residential. There's a certain amount of product out there that can be converted. A lot of times the historic buildings, there is a good, strong candidate for it because of the window line, the hallways. With residential units, you have to have egress and things like that for, exiting, fire, things like that, right? So historic buildings tend to be better candidates in general, but not all of them are going to be.
Yeah.
So.
Well, let's talk about historic buildings. I worked at the Courtyard Marriott downtown San Diego, and it was a historic building because it used to be an old bank. And we had a meeting room that was an old bank vault, like the whole silver, like with the big turn thing. And you open it up and it was a boardroom. It was so cool. But they were going through a renovation. I remember hearing how there were all these kind of rules and things that they could change and couldn't change. So what's your experience? Like, how do you approach a historic building versus a non-historic building in commercial real estate?
Yeah, for sure. I've had a lot of experience leasing historic office buildings over the course of my career. And there was one in particular in Salt Lake City called the Crandall Building. And it was owned by the namesake, the Crandalls. And this building, it was 1893. It had the bank vault. It had all the stuff. I remember when the Crandalls came to me and said, "We want a Starbucks." And I was like, "Oh, I don't know if I can get you a Starbucks."
Yeah.
I mean, And it was so crazy because we ended up negotiating a Starbucks lease at the corner of First and Main in Salt Lake City. And Starbucks was like, "Yeah, we'll work with whatever we need to work with. We want to be in this building." So it's kind of interesting when you've got a motivated tenant. There are ways you can work around things. There were things like signage that we had to be specific about. Obviously, the integrity of the building, the sandstone. There's certain elements that we want to preserve, right? That's the legacy. That's the beauty of these buildings that we don't want to lose. So it does take. Sometimes they can be more expensive. You definitely have to be more creative. Sometimes it takes longer. But placemaking, which is one of the reasons why I got into commercial real estate in the first place, is the opportunity for us to actually make an impact in our communities is pretty neat.
I find the struggle just from an events perspective on some of these older buildings is ADA. So like Canlis, for example, I think Canlis is an older building, but to get into the event space in the upstairs, they have to carry somebody if they needed to. And some of the other ones are just a little wonky, but yeah, I find that to be a challenge.
That is, yeah.
Okay, so I want to talk about what's called portfolio theory. And I bring this up because, like I mentioned, this was maybe going to be housing and now it's retail. And kind of this whole episode, we're talking about vacancies and what does that really mean? So what is portfolio theory and why is it important?
So I'm going to do my best to describe what portfolio theory is, but I want to cite that we have a think tank at Cushman Wakefield. It's headed up by Kevin Thorpe and Rebecca Rocky. And Rebecca Rocky just published this report called Reimagining Cities. And it's a deep dive. This is where portfolio theory comes from. It's a deep dive into 15 cities across the United States, looking at how the U.S. cities have been built. And there is this in Seattle cited in the report because we have a really interesting opportunity here and also an opportunity to reinvent ourselves for the next 5 to 50 years, right? Like, what do we want to be?
New year, new Seattle.
Exactly. But one of the things that's cited in the report and what we really want to think about is what is that balance within the portfolio balance of an urban walk-up, so it's a downtown area, to drive ultimate GDP. And what I mean by that is when you've got people living downtown, shopping downtown, eating, buying their groceries, having a proper grocery, right? That then creates a whole different live cycle. And then who are the people who work downtown? Well, they proliferate the same thing. Then they go to the theater, or they have places that they go, for play, the arenas, things like that. It all starts to really move. The only real cities that have that operating today really well, the only one in the United States really is New York. So if you can think of it like that, most U.S. cities were built with a car in mind. And when you have a car, we all love our cars, but it is like it does create a different ecosystem. So now we have this physical footprint. We're looking at it every day. And if you look at portfolio theory, Seattle is like roughly 62% office or work, and a little and then they have a live and a play category. Well, to be an ultimate, like maybe more portfolio balanced, work probably needs to be more like 42%.
Oh, wow, okay.
And then prop up the live to 32% and play to 26%. And the theory is that if you prop up the play and the live, you actually create a more productive 42%. Because the way that we use office space has changed. And if you look at European cities, a lot of those have been inherently were built with portfolio theory in mind because they were walkable and it was a different time period when they were built. So it's a big, lofty, that's kind of your mega topics. But like I'm so fascinated by it because if we really do kind of think about this, and this takes everybody. This is a private public
it involves like
partnerships.
rezoning. And
this
like
is
a
rezoning.
Lot. Yeah.
It's getting creative with how do we work with for sale housing downtown, and not just downtown. You think about the University District. That's another prime area where there's these urban walk-ups. But what we've seen is the more investment that we have in those, they've actually proliferated over the last 20, 30 years. So anyway, it's really positive
I think
stuff.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, and it's kind of just another way to reshape our thinking around getting rid of that fear that if we don't lease up every building in Seattle, then we're doomed. Because was it the right decision?
To have that
15 years ago, or did we build it because it was the thing at the time? And so there's no right or wrong. It's just how do we move through this to this next way that we want to work, live, play. And meet the needs of our population bases coming forward.
It maybe served a purpose and it made sense back then, but does it still make sense now?
Well, and candidly, you look at the millennials, right? Like when I think about millennial, because now this has changed so much, right? Over the last 20 years where at first the developers would say, let's build all this multifamily product with studios and one bedrooms. Well, now here we are. And they're still saying, oh, well, we built them for the millennial. And it's like, well, the millennial now has, you want to have more space. Yeah. You want a 3-bedroom, or maybe you want your own house, or different priorities change. So what do we do with those studios and 1 bedrooms?
Right.
The micro units was really hot for a while.
What were they?
Micro units.
Oh, yeah. There was one. And
now those are.
Yes. Right, there was one right next to where I lived, and I just couldn't understand. They all had like one shared kitchen. Like, what is this? Are you guys like part of Big Brother now? Like, you're all just hanging out together? Yeah. It also kind of reminds me, I see a lot of videos of how we've lost like our third place. And how the internet has almost become our third place. So like hanging out on TikTok and talking to people, or like being on Instagram, like that's where we're finding our community, and we don't have enough physical spaces to go to, which is probably why I'm at Yonder Cider all the time. It's my third place.
It's a really good point.
Okay. Anything else? I'm going to move to the last one. I mean, I know portfolio theory is like a huge
I know,
topic,
it's a big one. Check out the report.
Yes, I'll link it in the show
readers
notes.
if you, it's something late night reading.
Yeah. Well, it's just to get the conversation going with people. Okay, so the last one, I will admit, is not a commercial real estate story, but it's such a big story. I wanted the listeners to know what was going on. But Getty Images is acquiring Shutterstock. And for those that don't know, Getty Images is a Seattle company. I don't think very many people... Did you know that? I didn't know that before either. Or maybe I knew and I forgot. They acquired Shutterstock, which was worth about $3.7 billion. They're going to pay a mix of cash and purchase shares. But they're not going to own it 100%. So Getty Images will own about 55%, and Shutterstock will own the rest. They are two of the biggest businesses offering licensed stock images and videos. I think most people know what that is, but it's like stock photos and images. But now they're competing against AI images, obviously, and then also the general public taking amazing photos with our cell phones now. So the need is much less. Background. So in 1995, Mark Getty and Jonathan Klein founded this thing called Getty Communications in London. And then in 1997, Getty Communications merged with Photodisc to form Getty Images. In 99, they relocate to Seattle. And then they partnered with another company. They acquire another company, yada, yada. 2008, private equity acquires Getty Images. And then in 2012, they put it up for sale. And another private equity group, Carlyle, who, if you remember, owns part of the Sounders and the Rain, buys it. And then in 2018, the Getty family was like, we want it back. And so they bought it. And then in 2021, it goes public. So they've had a whole roller coaster of a company life. Let's see. I think those are all my notes from the article. Is there anything you want to say on that? Because I know it's not CR related, so it's okay if you don't have anything to say.
It's big news.
Big news. You're right. News. You're so right.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know a whole lot about this one in particular, but I do have concerns with the whole AI photographing and and the manipulation of that kind of thing. I've seen just recently, some colleagues were like, "Hey, look at what we can do!"
I know.
I'm like, wow,
scary.
this is. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the question I wrote down for you is that the article references, we are unclear how the Trump administration is going to handle some of these big companies combining. I know we talked a lot about in the Alex Halverson episode about the FTC really blocking a lot of these big companies coming together for antitrust reasons. And so we're curious, as the Trump administration comes in, would they block something like this? Would they not? So in terms of CRE, how are you looking at the Trump administration? What are people saying about that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. A lot of clients are asking the same thing. We did publish kind of like Trump 2.0, what can you expect? Our industry probably will do better, and there is a lot of positivity. So it's kind of an interesting time, but it really is a wait and see.
Okay.
We don't have enough, obviously we don't have enough data yet, but I would suggest keep a close eye. Things that we're tracking are like, what will be the impacts, with tariffs or potentially, or, interest rate changes. Not that that's a Trump administration thing. So a lot of
wait and see.
It's early.
Yeah,
it's early. There's just a lot of conversation going on right now. So I would say just focus on the one day at a time here.
Yeah, I'm taking that advice personally as well.
Yeah.
For a Trump administration.
Yeah.
I know what I was going to ask you about this one. The acquisition. So Getty Images acquires Shutterstock, and I think you've been through quite a few acquisitions through Cushman and Wakefield. What would you say is one of the kind of the biggest mistakes companies make when doing acquisitions, and or like any kind of lessons learned from your time there?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I've been through several acquisitions. I was with a boutique company that was then acquired by our company, and it's all about change management and some of the things. And I've been in a lot of change management opportunities myself over the course of my leadership. I also just want to say
change management is like a real thing.
It's real.
This is not just like a word that we're throwing around here. And I think it's a lost art, but people like study it, and there's a lot of information there. So I just wanted to call that out, that you're not using a buzzword. Yeah.
No, yeah, you're right. You're right. There is there are actually like teams of people who focus on how to do this right, and lead companies and lead organizations through this successfully. So you can kind of look at it different ways. One of the things I would say, the biggest lesson learned was when you're stepping into a new role, or if you're buying a company, or you're meeting all the new people and you really don't know, take time to figure out what you've got, and treat people right, and really over communicate, because probably the worst experiences I've had is where the communication was low. You didn't know what was going on. You didn't feel like maybe you would have understood the decision and why maybe there were layoffs or changes or things like that if it had been better communicated. So, and then the other one, personally, sometimes leaders have a tendency to maybe jump too quickly into initiatives and maybe being excited about new things. And I have personally gone through that too, where it's like, I probably jumped too fast and I should have paid more attention.
So tempting to do though when you come in and you're like, this is
I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
Right. So lessons learned around that, like take the time you need to make a good decision, over communicate.
Yeah. I love it. Okay. Well, we're going to wrap up. And the last question I ask is best advice, or any kind of advice for the listeners. This can be personal or professional. What do you have for us? You've given us a lot already, but...
Well, what I would say is I just got back from a 12-day trekking trip through the high Andes in Peru.
I think I saw some photos on LinkedIn. That looked incredible.
It was incredible. And it was incredible to be in the Peruvian culture, in the high Andes, without any other distractions, meeting people, learning about the culture, pushing myself physically. And, I'll tell you, that was taking time away from my career. And it's really important to do that. So I've never, ever looked back from a trip that I did and said that wasn't well worth it. Take that time. It's always hard, especially the busier you get and the harder things get. And, it feels like, gosh, I've got this choice to make. I've never looked back from that kind of thing. So that's my one piece of advice.
I love it.
My second piece of advice is don't overthink it.
Oh, you lost me there.
Don't overthink it. And trust your instincts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's really going to kind of ties to what we were talking about in the beginning of the episode of career changes and things like that. Well, Alison, thank you again for sitting down with me and reading the articles and hosting me. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you at the party.
Thank you very much, Rachel. My pleasure.
This has been The Weekly, with production assistance from Nick Patry. If you liked what you heard, rate us and write a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. We love listener feedback, so if you have any story suggestions, comments, or complaints, email us at info@theweeklyseattle.com. Make sure to check back next Sunday for the latest local business news. We'll see you next time.